This is Robert Kraft, and I'm your host on SNN Network. And with me today is a familiar face, good friend of the show, Mr. Tom Shaughnessy from Delphi Digital. He's the co-founder. Tom, welcome back, man. Good to see you. Happy New Year, too.
Bobby, Happy New Year, man. Thanks for having me on. Always great to catch up and talk with you.
It's not too late to say Happy New Year. I know we all just watched that first episode of Curb, but it's not too late, right? I mean, it's mid-February.
No,
We're good.
no, we're right in the gist of it, and January is a write-off. Come on, let's start the new year now.
This is true. This is very true. Well, last time I had you on, it was around the time that Facebook announced the big news with Libra. So that was about, I think, 6-7 months ago. So I'm thinking let's start first with kind of a since then, what's been going on with Facebook and Libra, and then let's get into some other cool, interesting news that's been covering the crypto space.
Yeah, for sure. So Libra is a big deal. There's no doubt about that. It really linked like traditional equities, traditional world to crypto and blockchain and tech, and that's super interesting. The bad news is that it's faced a lot of pushback, regulatory pushback from the government. A lot of their founding members, so the Libra Association or organization, which runs the foundation, is run by supposedly 100 companies, 28 of which signed up off the bat, Fortune 500 companies, but a bunch of them dropped off. I think the count is down to 20 or 21 at this point because they found out it would be competitive and things along that nature. So it's a big deal, but the momentum is definitely hurt a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, things like this just probably requires so much time and dealing with the regulation and the compliance and all that stuff. And not to mention Facebook has its own other issues, not crypto related. So I'm sure it's tough.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, I think they'll eventually get it off the ground. And, the interesting part about Facebook's Libra is that it's a low volatility stable coin. So it won't be pegged at $1 like most people think. It'll be backed by a basket of traditional currencies like the US dollar and some foreign currencies and potentially government bonds and things along that nature. But the interesting thing about Libra is that a lot of people in the crypto space have seen the news last week where central banks like the US, the Chinese central bank, and Japan all released news that they're thinking about implementing central bank digital currency. Something like this would be like a digital form of their currency. And a lot of people think that competes with Libra. So they've been kind of, against each other the past week or two. It is true. They will compete for, I guess, users and adoption. But the interesting part people have to remember is that Libra's basket is underpinned with these existing currencies. So it's really one built on top of the other at the end of the day. So they don't really compete too much in that sense.
Gotcha. And also for real quick disclosure, I am not a shareholder of Facebook. Tom?
Not either.
Gotcha. All right, so you brought up some other interesting news that's been going on surrounding the crypto space. You're my crypto guy. Let's get into it. What are some of the other interesting news items that our audience should pay attention to or may have missed?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot out there, and there's just so much news flow from the teams in crypto because there's just thousands of teams pumping out updates. It's like the new internet, so it's just so much to keep up with. But at a high level, two of the interesting things coming up that people should definitely be aware of for the broader public is that Bitcoin's halving event is going to happen in a couple of months.
It's what? A halving event?
Yeah, so the rewards that the Bitcoin protocol pays out to miners is going to get cut in half. It happens every 4 years. It's part of the supply schedule or the issuance schedule of Bitcoin. It's not going to hit 21 million for over another 100 years, but this reduces the supply and the reward to miners as the value of Bitcoin grows or doesn't grow. So some people are talking about a potential supply shock. I think the historical data doesn't really lead to a massive change the day of, but potentially afterwards. So that's a big event that's going to happen and rock the Bitcoin world a little bit that's coming up.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I mean, listen, I'm as noob as it gets when it comes to crypto world. I think I'm pretty sure I'm as noob as it gets to everything when it comes to, investing and whatnot. That's kind of why I have my channel. But but really when having let's dive into this a little bit more. What exactly does that mean and how does that what does it mean?
Yeah, so basically miners on the Bitcoin network are run large server farms doing very complex math to validate transactions and secure the network, right? Social consensus, thousands of nodes. These nodes are rewarded for doing this with freshly minted Bitcoin. So they perform work, they secure the network, and they're rewarded with Bitcoin. If you mine a block, you get a certain amount of Bitcoin. That amount is getting cut in half in a couple of months. It does it every 4 years. It's basically, it has a lot of interesting effects on the Bitcoin basically ecosystem, but a lot of people think this will, potentially impact the price. I don't think it will the day of. It may afterwards, but it's definitely a shock because if the Bitcoin price doesn't go up and the rewards get cut in half, miners don't make as much money. It's simple math there. So in the past, Bitcoin's price has always, gone up, which is, good, but people have to be aware of the other side. Bitcoin's price goes down and the halving kicks in. It could be bad for miners there. I don't think that'll happen, but it's worth talking about.
Gotcha. And will this have any effect on, altcoins and stuff like that, or is this really just solely focused on Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's definitely only for Bitcoin. Some protocols that have forked Bitcoin, added new features, changed features, have the same issuance schedule or the number of coins that get generated by the platform to help secure it or for stakeholders. But for this specific instance, this is just for Bitcoin. Litecoin has a bit of a different timeline there, but only for Bitcoin. And, to answer your other question, everything right now is highly correlated to the price of Bitcoin. So when Bitcoin moves, altcoins or alts move and vice versa, usually at a higher beta than Bitcoin. So if you want a little bit more exposure, you can play other coins for some added leverage there.
Gotcha. All right. So offline, we were talking about a couple other news items. You mentioned to me that funds are starting to kind of gear up to and really loading the coffers with capital to either deploy or already have deployed. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, for sure. So some news that came out last week was that Blockchain Capital, which is one of the largest funds in the space, they manage over $300 million. And I know that might not be a lot to the traditional finance people in the room, but for crypto that has a couple $100 billion in market cap, it's quite large. They're raising another fund, and I think they're aiming to raise $250 million. It's actually a funny story. When I was working at Oppenheimer Equity Research, I used to read Spencer Bogart's equity research reports from Needham on Bitcoin before he left to go to Blockchain Capital. So it's kind of like a small world there. But they have a 2020 outlook out, and they have some pretty interesting views there. One of which I strongly agree with is that competition in the crypto space with all the new layer ones launching or all the new blockchains, I don't think the competition is going to happen there. I think it's more going to happen on what's built on top of the main existing blockchains today. Ethereum, Bitcoin, take your pick. I just think it's very hard for these new layer ones to attract a community and to launch because there's only so many users at layer one. So I think competition is going to shift vertically instead of horizontally there.
Well, let's dig in on that. What effect can that have on the community if there's now? I mean, it reminds me of it's almost like the FANG stocks for the crypto industry. Is like, here's your layer ones and compete if you will, but you're either going to get swallowed up or not launch.
No, I mean it's really it's not worth really overthinking sometimes, right? Like you have. And it's very nuanced. You go down a lot of rabbit holes, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of new blockchains that were generously funded by VCs at billion-dollar valuations. So these are brand new layer one blockchains that are going live. They either have recently or they will go live within the next 0 to 24 months. These are different versions of not different versions of Ethereum, but Ethereum's its own blockchain. So these are different versions. These now have to go to market and compete with layer ones that have already been here for years. Like, I'll give you an example. Ethereum has $1 billion locked up in decentralized finance apps. These are apps that let you mint stable coins to pay in a stable crypto to each other, or synthetics to take out synthetic derivatives on other positions, or lending protocols or decentralized exchanges. It doesn't matter. But the point is, you already have this Goliath in the market with, a ton of money in it, a ton of primitives and tools and docs built out, and you're launching a new layer one to compete with that years behind. I think a lot of these new platforms probably over 90% of them are going to go to some form of a zero.
Gotcha. So another thing that we always have to cover on here is regulation. What's going on from a political sense in terms of crypto? I mean, we got this 2020 election cycle, and to be honest, I don't think I've heard one word about crypto mentioned. I mean, there's a lot of other topics that are very important as well, but I don't think I've heard one word about it at all from any of the potential candidates.
Oh man, I'm kind of glad my industry isn't political on the regulatory front because it's so political internally with all the infighting. So, but to answer your question, I haven't heard a lot from the candidates. I've heard some from Andrew Yang on the crypto front. I don't know how serious he is, but he has been on some crypto podcasts. I think he was on Stephen McKee's on blockchain or Block Channel. But the interesting news today is that, or recently, is that one of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commissioners, Hester Pierce, who's done amazing work in the space, I applaud her and her team. She proposed a safe harbor for token projects. So I have to read a little bit more into it, but I think that tokens would have a 3-year window before they're potentially regulated by the SEC. I think that's kind of the ruling there. I think it would do a ton because, it's not that there is, nefarious behavior in crypto. Don't get me wrong. There's ICOs that shouldn't have happened. There's leaders that shouldn't be here, stuff like that. But for the majority, it's developers in their dorm room or their startup that know how to code like a genius, but they don't know, SEC regulations or laws. They just want to build the next Facebook or what have you. So I think this could really help spur adoption a bit.
Gotcha. I mean, in what sense? Because how I don't know how that would work. It almost sounds like it's like a biotech clinical trial, and then they go for FDA approval.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, there's risks, right? Like it's people's money on the line, it's people's time, reputations on the line for this stuff. But what is good about this is there's like no clarity in crypto for years on what people are able to do, where they're able to do it, what are they complying with. It's basically like you're rolling the dice and seeing what happens. But what I've always told people is, just be very transparent. Don't be an idiot and just don't do anything illegal, right? Like just be an upstanding person. But the problem is that other countries are rolling out actual frameworks and straightforward ways to comply and to launch a crypto project. So the US is at risk of losing its edge, just like it's at risk of losing its edge on things like 5G. You know what I mean? Because it moves so slow against China and Singapore and other countries and other areas. So the government's got to lay out some frameworks that people could comply with, or it's going to lose its edge. It already has. I mean, crypto's huge in Asia, it's huge in Switzerland, and it's huge all over the world because people know that they could launch things without getting screwed over.
Gotcha. So another thing that we talked about offline that I wanted to hit on was this idea of tokenized revenue streams. So this has been in the news. Tell me a little bit more about it and who's been kind of at the forefront here.
Yeah, so it's really new, actually. It's so just some context. Historically, ICOs were the way a lot of projects raised money from like 2017 to late 2018 into 2019. Basically, they raised an ICO, but through tokens, and they accepted Ethereum or Bitcoin, and they, in return, gave tokens to people to have stakeless in their projects. A lot of these tokens were not designed well, didn't have any value, accrual mechanisms, things along that nature. Tokens of 2020 are getting a lot better. There's tokens that make sense, that have value accrual methods, that play a pivotal and necessary role in the protocol. Things like synthetics, full disclosure, I own some synthetics, and things along that nature. But to your point, there's a new company out called Fairmint, and it's based in San Francisco, and they're trying to tokenize revenue streams. So instead of ownership or not ownership in a protocol, instead of like a utility token, they're basically tokenizing revenue. So no need to hit $10 million in revenue and some balance in cash. You could tokenize your revenue that is on Stripe or Shopify or things along that nature, today.
Gotcha. So, I always have to ask this question, every day there might be a new potential investor looking at cryptocurrency. What would you say is your advice at this given moment, February 2020, looking at the space? What are some tips you'd give that person who might be interested? And I might be including myself in that,
We could talk offline as long as you want. You know that, Bobby.
Yeah, no, I'm just kidding.
No, but no, you're up to speed, man. But I'm just trying to think through what I would give somebody totally new to the space. And I would, as much as I'm interested in DeFi and Web3 and all these crazy teams, you have to understand the beginning, right? So I would tell people, understand what Bitcoin actually means, right? A decentralized form of money. What actually is that? Like, why should you care? Like, and just go into the risk factors, like pension funds being underfunded, crazy monetary policies that are unsustainable around the world, a global money that nobody can mess with, that the supply is predetermined and can't be messed with by a government. Something that's global and immutable, and you can carry it around in your head and transfer it anywhere in seconds. Like, once you understand kind of the cornerstones of Bitcoin, how it solves the double spend problem, you're on a really good footing, because if you could convince people to grasp Bitcoin in 30 seconds or 5 minutes, you don't have to teach them anything else, because they'll go down the rabbit hole and they'll figure out everything else themselves.
Gotcha. And Tom, are you an owner in any of the coins or tokens that you mentioned here in this interview today?
Yes, so I own Bitcoin, own Ethereum, own Synthetics.
Gotcha. All right, well, with that, Tom, where can my audience go and find more information about you and Delphi Digital?
Yeah, appreciate that, Bobby. So I'm on Twitter, it's Shaughnessy119, Irish last name and my birthday. And then on web, we're delphidigital.io.
Cool. Well, Tom, as always, thank you for sharing your insights with me, and look forward to the next update.
Yeah, always great, Bobby. I'm looking forward to next time. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you.